In this chapter and in the coming lectures, we are going to talk about views. So first of all, what is the motivation behind views? It is general in software engineering that applications should hide concrete implementation. So I'm not sure whether you are familiar with procedural programming languages such as Java or C++, but this is exactly the reason why solid principles and design patterns came to be. So it is a good programming paradigm that applications should hide concrete implementation. So users can use the application without knowing about the implementation details. And good database design is very similar. We should keep database tables private and users can access data only through a set of views. And basically this is the motivation behind views. So we would like to restrict accessing the given database tables. Okay, so views are SQL statements that are stored in the database. Views do not involve data storage, which means views do not consume disk space. We just assign a name to a select or a query. We store this given query for others to use. So users can use this view to access data just like querying tables directly. So we can use the statements we have been talking about in the previous lectures, for example, the select statement, the group by statement, the order by statement. The main difference is that we can create a view that's going to store values that are present in multiple database tables. So basically, we can assign a name to a select or a query and we store this given query for others to use. Okay, so the basic intuition is that we can use something like this. We have the database tables and we have the application that's going to use a MySQL database, for example. And of course, we have several database tables, so the application is going to get all the data from the database tables directly. But of course, there's a problem with this approach because of course the application can access private information such as credit card related details because of course the credit card related information is stored in a database. So this is again where views can prove to be extremely useful if we want to restrict the access to private information, private data. Okay, so this is why we can create a view and the application is going to communicate with the view instead of communicating with the database tables directly. Okay, so for example, exposing an entire bank account may violate some policies, so we define a view instead, and the user of the application can access only a portion of the bank account in order to verify the identity of the given user. So we can limit access to a given database table with the help of views. So let's summarize the motivation and the advantages of views. First of all, views can hide complexity. So SQL queries can be very complex, joining several database tables and so on. Of course, there may be several complex calculations in a given query, so we can encapsulate this complexity into a view and we can use the view as a table later on. Okay, then we have security issues. Views can restrict access to given data, so we can encapsulate the data that a user needs to see. This is exactly what we have been talking about when dealing with the credit card related example. And finally, we can summarize data from various tables which can be used to generate reports. If you are familiar with Java's Jasper report, then you know that using views are extremely powerful. Because of course, unfortunately, modern applications need to store a huge amount of data, and because of the huge amount of data, we have to use several database tables. So usually a given application may contain hundreds or even thousands of database tables. And of course, you may guess that it is quite complicated to get several values from multiple database tables. So it can happen that a given report relies heavily on more than 20 database tables. So what can we do? We can use a view that's going to hide the complexity. It is going to gather all the relevant information from multiple database tables, and then we will use just a single view in order to generate the report, for example with Java or C++, PHP or whatever. So this is why we have to talk about views, and this is exactly what we are going to talk about in the coming lectures. Thanks for watching.
Hi. In this lecture, we are going to create the database table we are going to manipulate in this chapter. So I would like to create table student I would like to have several columns such as student ID. It's going to be, for example, an integer in this case. It's going to be for demonstration purposes. So for example, an integer int. Okay. Then we will have the student name. It's going to be a varchar, for example, with 30 characters. And of course, without a typo, something like this. Then we are going to have the university. It's going to be a varchar as well, for example, with 30 characters. And then we will have the city, the location of the university, varchar, for example, with 20 characters. So basically, this is the database table we are looking for. We don't need something like this. So for example, the primary key will be the student ID. So let's use something like this. And basically, this is what we are looking for. So let's run this SQL command. Okay, and we have managed to create the database table for the students. Let's update the scheme. We have the table student. So let's select the rows. Of course, it is empty by default, but we have the student ID, student name, university, and city in the student database table. Thanks for watching.
Hi. In this lecture, we are going to talk about views, but I would like to insert several items into the database table. So let's insert, for example, I would like to insert Adam. Okay, with the university ELTE. It is a famous university in Hungary. So the city will be Budapest. Then we will have the Joe with ID 3, then 4 and 5, okay. The Joe will have the university MIT at Boston, okay. Then we will have Hans with, for example, University of Berlin. Of course, the city is going to be Berlin. And we will have John with Harvard, for example. Oh, I guess that Harvard is in Cambridge, maybe. Okay, so let's insert these values. So I would like to run this script. Okay, so as you can see, we have Kevin, we have Adam, we have Joe, we have Hans, we have John in our database table. And we have been talking about the basic concept of views. So for example, I would like to create a view that referencing the student name and the university, but I'm not curious about the student ID and the city. Maybe because these are private information, whatever. So I'm going to say that I would like to create a view. By the way, SQL is non-case sensitive. Okay, we usually use uppercase letters for the commands, but it doesn't matter. So let's use the uppercase, create view, and the view name will be the student view, for example. And we have to specify as, and here we have to define that I would like to select the student name and the university into the student view from the student table. So basically, this is what we are looking for. Let's run this query. Okay, create view student. As you can see, it is executed without any problem. And we can say that, okay, I would like to select everything from the student view. So this is what we have been discussing in a previous lecture, that basically the student view is going to be a virtual table. We can make queries in this given view. So we can say that I would like to select everything from the student view. You can manipulate and handle this view as we would do it with a table. So let's run this query. And as you can see, it is like the students table. But what happened? we created a view, the student view, that I would like to have the student name and the university from the student table. I'm not interested in the student ID and the city, so that's why the student view has two database table columns, student name and university. But as you can see, the student name and university table columns are the same as we have specified for the student table. Okay, of course, because we have created the view based on the student table, so nothing staggering. So this is how we create a standard view. Thanks for watching. Hi. So in the previous lecture, we have been talking about how to create views. So create view, student view as, and we have to define that what database table columns we would like to include in the view from the given database table. And what's very important, that we are able to make some changes to the student view and it's going to be reflected in the database table student. So we can update a given view as we would do it with a database table. Update student view. We have to set the university to be equal to, for example, alta, where the student name is equal to, for example, Joe. So as you can see that here Joe is attending MIT, but we are able to change it with the help of an update query, and we update the view, but this change is going to be reflected in the original student's database table. So let's see. We update student view and set the university to be equal to ELTE, where the student name is equal to Joe. I guess it's going to work just fine. Okay, something's not good. Okay, there's going to be an error code because the save update option is set, which means that we cannot update or delete records without specifying a given key, for example, a primary key, and of course we don't want to do that. So we would like to be able to modify a given column without defining the primary key, of course. So I would like to set the SQL save updates to be equal to 0. What does it mean? Basically, the 0 is a false Boolean variable. I would like to turn off that warning and error code. Okay, and if we run this update now, it's going to be a valid SQL query, as you can see. So I would like to select everything from the student view. Let's see what happened. As you can see, we have managed to change that the student Joe is attending ELTE instead of MIT. So we have managed to update this given student view, and let's see that if I select everything from student, let's run it. As you can see, the original student's table content has been changed as well. We have changed Joe property, that the university is going to be ELTE instead of MIT, and it is reflected in the student's database table, unlike the fact that we were manipulating the student view. Okay, so this is how we are able to update the student view. Thanks for watching. Hi. In this lecture, I would like to show you how to drop basically a student view. So far, we have been talking about how to create a database table, how to create a view basically referring to a given database table, how to update that given database view, and we have come to the conclusion that if we manipulate the view, the changes are going to be reflected in the original table. And I would like to drop. So drop the view, student view. And if I run this query, let's run it, and I would like to select everything from the student view, there's going to be an error. Okay, table student view doesn't exist. So this is how we are able to get rid of a virtual table, a so-called view, with the help of SQL query. Thanks for watching.